Princess Seraphine Oralis sent the human away in shame because she believed an empire could survive without one quiet man standing in its shadow. And by the time she learned the truth, 7 worlds had stopped answering. 3 fleets had turned their banners inward, the border markets had gone dark, and her own generals were begging for the exile she had dismissed to come home. It began in the Hall of Mirrors, beneath the ceiling of captured starlight, where every noble house of the Vair Dominion had gathered to watch her first imperial judgment. She was young, newly crowned, surrounded by old predators wearing silk, and desperate to prove she was not the frightened girl they whispered about behind crystal fans. Captain Adrian Vale stood below the throne in his plain Terran coat. No medals, no jewels. Only a worn black glove over his left hand, and eyes that looked tired before anyone spoke. He had served her father for 12 years as military liaison, treaty witness, palace security advisor, border negotiator, unofficial conscience, and, according to the gossiping court, human pet. Seraphine hated that last whisper most of all, because she had grown up watching her father turn to Adrian before signing decrees, before deploying fleets, before trusting nobles, and some bitter part of her feared the Empire had never respected House Orlis at all. Only the human behind it. So when Lord Vaylor accused Adrian of overstepping protocol, when he presented forged reports claiming the human had countermanded royal orders at the outer colonies, when the court murmured that Terran arrogance had finally shown its teeth, Seraphine did not ask why every servant in the hall had gone pale. She did not ask why the old generals looked at the floor. She looked at Adrian, saw him silent, saw him refuse to kneel, and mistook restraint for guilt. She asked him one question. "Did you give orders in my name?" Adrian answered. "Yes." The hall inhaled like a beast. Lord Vaylor smiled. Seraphine's hands tightened on the throne arms. To whom she demanded? Refugee convoy captains, grain wardens, medical frigates, border militia, station engineers, and 3 merchant clans that owed your father a debt, he said. The honesty struck like betrayal. By what authority? She asked. By necessity, he answered. That word burned her worse than a confession. Necessity was what tyrants used after breaking law. Necessity was what frightened councils called cowardice. Necessity was what every noble had told her when urging surrender of the eastern mines. Sale of debtor children, exile of troublesome veterans, and sacrifice of outer worlds to preserve the glittering core, she rose from the throne. Because rulers and mirrors must perform strength even when strength is missing. You presume to carry imperial authority without my permission. Adrian looked at her not as a servant begging, not as a criminal cornered, but as someone already mourning a disaster he could see forming beyond the walls. Your Highness, he said quietly, I kept promises your father made before the border storms cut communication. The throne is not only a chair, it is also a memory. Lord Vaylor laughed softly. There, princess, hear it, the human lecture's bloodline on kingship. Seraphine felt heat flood her face, every noble watching. Every rival waiting for weakness, she said the words she would remember until the day stars seemed colder. Captain Adrian Vale, by authority of the Sapphire Throne, you are stripped of office, expelled from palace command, removed from all imperial channels, and ordered beyond Vair space before the 3rd bell. You have shamed this court. Leave before I decide chains would suit you better. Adrian bowed once. Not deeply, not theatrically. Just enough to respect the crown even as it cut him. Then he removed the small silver signet her father had given him, placed it on the mirror floor and said, I hope you are right about me, princess, because if you are wrong, the empire has 6 days. He turned and walked out through nobles who stepped aside by instinct, not because he had power now, but because some part of them still remembered he had once known where all the fires were buried. That was the first crack, and no one heard it because pride makes such beautiful music. For the first day, Seraphine felt relief. The court praised her firmness. Lord Vaylor called it the rebirth of sovereign dignity. Young nobles toasted the end of Terran interference, and the palace poets began drafting verses about the princess who tamed the foreign shadow. Seraphine sat through banquets, military briefings, and congratulatory petitions with her chin high and her stomach hollow. She told herself Adrian had wanted too much influence, that her father had been too trusting, that an empire spanning 9 moons and 30 colonies could not possibly lean upon one human who spoke softly and wore old boots. Yet small oddities began at once. The kitchen quarters sent a request asking whether the human meal ration protections remained valid. The Dockworkers Guild refused to unload grain ships until someone confirmed. Captain Vale's seal still guaranteed winter pay. The embassy from the Mer Combine delayed treaty signatures because Adrian had always translated their silence clauses. The Third Fleet requested clarification on whether the Quiet Corridor remained open. Serafini asked Admiral Keth what the Quiet Corridor was, and the old admiral's scales dulled with fear, a civilian route through pirate space. Highness for medical evacuation, who authorized it? She asked. Your father, Keth said after a pause, and Captain Vale maintained it. Seraphine ordered the Imperial Office to maintain all existing agreements. The office asked for the contact lists. There were none in palace records. Only Adrian's name beside hundreds of living promises. By the second day, the outer messages changed tone. Not alarm yet, not rebellion, only confusion growing teeth. The mining moon Ralthus reported that 3 human-built stabilizers had stopped receiving maintenance codes. The engineers said they could improvise. But only Adrian knew which old Terran parts had been modified for alien gravity seams. The agricultural world Numa withheld grain exports because their famine relief debt was signed not by the Empire, but by Adrian personally. In the days when Seraphine's father had been trapped under siege and no noble would risk convoy ships, the free captains of the Ashbelt sent a single line. If Vale is gone, the old map is gone. Clarify, or we scatter. Seraphine slammed the message crystal down and demanded why smugglers mattered. General Orvath answered, They are not smugglers when they carry medicine through blockades. Highness, they are deniable logistics. She hated the word deniable. Hated the way every necessary thing seemed hidden beneath court language by evening. Lord Vaylor assured her these were temporary spasms from corrupt networks losing their patron. He advised arrests, audits, public declarations. Seraphine signed 3 decrees, with a hand steady enough to impress the room. 1 suspended Adrian's informal seals, 1 ordered every colonial officer to resubmit loyalty oaths, and 1 forbade Imperial personnel from corresponding with him. The decrees left the palace like polished blades, and by midnight, 5 colony governors resigned rather than sign oaths that erased promises made during famine. Plague and war, the Empire did not collapse loudly at first. It simply stopped trusting its own weight. On the 3rd day, the northern border went silent. The Varkan Ascendancy, an old enemy that had stayed behind treaty lines for 12 years, began moving patrol fleets into disputed space. Seraphine demanded an explanation from the War Council. Admiral Keth unfolded a star map with trembling claws. The Varkan Treaty was never enforced by our fleet strength alone. Highness, it was enforced by the War Ledger. What ledger? She asked. The ledger of favors Captain Vale held. Prison exchanges, hostage returns, battlefield burials, plague aid. Secret family recoveries, emergency medical codes, 1,000 small mercies that made Varkan commanders hesitate before crossing lines. Seraphine stared at him. Are you telling me barbarians respected us because Adrian Vale was kind to them? Keth answered carefully. Not kind, Highness. Exact. He returned bodies when others burned them. He warned civilian ships before battles. He punished raids without slaughtering villages. He kept count. The Varkan do not fear kindness. They fear a human who remembers every debt and every line crossed. Lord Vaylor cut in superstitious nonsense. The Ascendancy tests a new ruler. We respond with strength. He proposed sending the 4th Fleet to the border. Seraphine approved. At dawn, the 4th Fleet reported half power. The shipyard crews had refused emergency launch because hazard bonuses, promised after the furnace plague by Adrian, had never been written into the Imperial budget. They would not move until the palace honored the dead workers' widows. Vaylor called it mutiny. Admiral Keth called it paperwork returning with a knife. Asterisk. Then came the southern riots. The Helian labor districts pacified for 8 years. erupted after Imperial auditors froze community defense funds Adrian had arranged through temple banks. Seraphine watched public screens show burning tax offices. Not palaces, not schools, only tax offices. And citizens holding signs with a human phrase she had never heard. No shield, no tithe, she demanded meaning, a minister said. During the last Raider season, Captain Vale promised that districts paying Imperial levies would receive shield generators before noble pleasure domes got replacements. The shields arrive, but no decree exists. The auditors called them stolen property and seized them this morning. Seraphine closed her eyes, hearing Adrian's voice. The throne is not only a chair, it is also memory. She sent the shields back. But late mercy looks like fear by nightfall. 3 more districts refused tax collection, not for revolution, for guarantees. The Empire was not being attacked from outside yet, it was being questioned from within. And no court education had taught Seraphine that the worst question a citizen could ask was not, "Who rules us?" but, "Will they remember what they promised?" By the 4th day, even the palace began to fail. Guards missed rotation times because Adrian had quietly paid their families when noble treasurers delayed wages. Servants stopped entering certain corridors because he had been the one who checked them for old assassination traps. The Royal Falcon drones crashed into the East Garden because their flight paths had been adjusted. Years ago, by a Terran security patch no one understood, Seraphine's own private lift halted between floors for 17 minutes. And when the engineer arrived, sweating and apologetic, he said Captain Vale used to recalibrate the ancient system every second moon. Himself, why himself, Seraphine snapped. The engineer lowered his gaze, because no house contractor could be trusted near the sovereign lift. Highness, and because he remembered which wires lied. That phrase haunted her, which wires lied. She began walking the palace with new eyes. Every functioning door, every paid widow, every calm border captain, every food convoy, every quiet neighborhood, every treaty footnote, every assassin who had not struck, every enemy who had hesitated. Perhaps Adrian had touched all of it, not by ruling, not by stealing, but by noticing what proud people refused to see, and then the Empire learned what absence sounds like when the one who listened is gone. At the 5th dawn, the Citadel of Mirrors received 9 emergency signals at once. Ralthus, gravity seems destabilizing. Numa Grain Fleet withholding departure. 4th Fleet stuck in dock. Varkan cruisers crossing treaty line. Helion districts barricading tax gates. Mercombine suspending recognition. Ashbelt captains vanishing into deep roots. Palace security compromised. And the Western Medical Convoy, carrying 12,000 plague refugees missing in the Sable Drift. Seraphine stood in the central command pit while ministers shouted over one another. Lord Vaylor insisted the crisis proved Adrian's corruption. He claimed the human had built dependencies to hold the throne hostage. He demanded mass arrests of workers, admirals, engineers, and colonial governors. Seraphine watched his mouth move, watched sweat shine beneath his jeweled collar, watched his eyes flick not to the refugee convoy marker, but to the border fleet marker, where war would increase his house contracts. Suddenly, she understood that some men called anything they did not control corruption. General Orvoth stepped forward, Highness. If the Western convoy is truly in the Sable Drift, only one person knows the old rescue route, Seraphine said. Do not say his name. But the general said it anyway, Captain Vale. Lord Valair slammed his hand on the rail. The exile is forbidden contact by royal decree. Seraphine looked at the map. 12,000 refugees blinking toward death. Then she reached for the command crystal. Rescinded my decree, she said. The chamber fell silent. Vaylor whispered, Highness. Seraphine turned on him. Find Adrian Vale. They found him on the dead moon of Carthus. Because of course he had not gone to safety. He had taken no royal ship, no escort, no treasure, only an old Terran shuttle and the silver signet she had cast at his feet, which he had left behind because he no longer wanted proof of service. Carthus had once been a battlefield, then a prison depot, then a graveyard for broken fleets. And Adrian was there among wrecks, helping Ashbelt captains repair emergency beacon buoys with his sleeves rolled up and a child on his shoulders. feeding cables through a cracked tower. Seraphine watched the long-range image in disbelief. He was not raising an army, not plotting revenge, not waiting dramatically in exile for apology. He was fixing the parts of the empire that had already fallen beyond quartzite. When the palace hail reached him, he did not answer at first. The ash captains answered instead, voices rough with resentment. Your court forbade us to speak to him. Your auditors called us thieves. Your noble patrols seized our fuel. Now you remember us, because refugees are missing. Seraphine did not know how to respond as princess. So she responded as a person. Yes, she said, too late. And I am asking anyway. Silence followed. Then Adrian appeared on the screen. Older than 5 days should make a man, grease on his cheek. Bandage around one wrist, Highness. The old title did not soften her. It broke something, Captain Vale. The Western medical convoy is lost in the Sable Drift. 12,000 aboard. He looked away from the screen. Toward someone off image, already moving before he had been asked. How long? She said. 8 hours, since last signal. Adrian's face tightened. Then they have 4 left. She said what pride had delayed. I was wrong. Come home. He answered, no, not cruelly, not loudly, simply no. Seraphine felt every minister behind her inhale. Adrian continued, I will find the convoy. I will send you what you need to stabilize Ralthus, Numa, Hellion, and the border. But I am not coming back to stand behind a throne that can discard memory when nobles clap. Seraphine flinched. Lord Vaylor, listening from the side chamber, smiled like a wound opening. She forced herself to continue. Adrian, people are dying. Yes, he said. So stop making this about whether I forgive you. You want to save them? Then listen carefully. He began giving orders, and even through a damaged moon relay. The Empire leaned toward his voice. Send no warship into the Sable Drift. Their engines will ignite the dust. Use hospital drones with cold thrusters. Route through the old Pilgrim beacons. Reopen the Ashbelt fuel amnesty. Release hazard pay to the 4th Fleet widows. Return Helian shields with public apology. Honor Numa famine debts. And tell the Varkan border commander that Vale remembers the Red Bridge. Admiral Keth whispered ancestors. Adrian looked straight through the screen. And arrest anyone who advises punishment before repair. Seraphine's eyes moved to Vaylor. His smile vanished. That was the moment the court realized the exile still commanded the truth, and truth had more soldiers than fear. Seraphine ordered everything Adrian said, not because it was easy, but because 5 days of ignoring him had proved the cost of pride. Lord Valar protested until Captain Sira, commander of palace security, placed a hand on her sword and asked whether he preferred formal objection or immediate silence. The court chose motion. Palace treasurers released funds they claimed did not exist. Hellion shields were returned under royal apology. Grain debts were honored in public. Engineers received Adrian's technical packets for Ralthus. The 4th Fleet crews got their promised widow pay, and Admiral Keth sent a coded message to the Varkan commander. Vale remembers the Red Bridge. The Varkan cruisers halted 6 minutes later, then reversed to treaty line without firing. Seraphine asked what the Red Bridge was. Keth said, a place where Captain Vale returned the enemy prince's body under fire, and also destroyed the warlord who used the prince as bait. Both mercy and warning in one memory, Highness. By then, Adrian had launched into the Sable Drift aboard a patched Ashbelt rescue cutter, guiding cold drones through dust so volatile that one hot engine flare could turn the entire region into a starless fireball. Seraphine watched the rescue feed from the command pit, unable to sit, unable to pray properly. The missing convoy was found broken around an invisible gravity reef. Medical ships spinning powerless, refugees sealed in failing wards. Adrian's cutter drifted between them, dark and silent, using hand thrusters, cable lines. An old beacon song sung over radio by ash captains who knew he hated being called hero. One by one, the medical ships stabilized. One by one, distress lights turned blue when the final wardship began falling toward the reef. Adrian left his cutter in a suit with cracked seals and pushed a manual anchor into place himself. The feed showed nothing grand, no explosion, no blazing duel, only a small human figure against impossible dark, refusing to let 12,000 strangers become numbers. Seraphine stood with both hands over her mouth, and for the first time understood why her father had trusted him. The convoy survived. But victory did not heal humiliation. It sharpened it. Because now every world knew the princess had sent away the man who came back only far enough to save them. Public channels filled with gratitude for Adrian and quieter anger for the throne. Helian children painted human handprints on returned shields. Numa farmers loaded grain with banners reading promises or law. Ash captains reopened the quiet corridor but refused palace inspections. Ralthus stabilized its gravity seams and sent Seraphine a message of loyalty addressed first to the Empire, second to Captain Vale, third to the princess. Seraphine did not punish them for it. She deserved the order. The court, however, became uglier. Lord Valor gathered nobles who felt exposed by Adrian's packets, because each repaired crisis revealed old thefts. Unpaid widows seized shields, falsified routes, private contracts, border bribes, names and signatures that polite society had buried under perfume. Valor argued that the human had humiliated the crown by saving it publicly. He claimed Seraphine must either break him or be ruled by him. And frightened nobles listened. Seraphine no longer did. She read every packet Adrian sent. Not only orders, but explanations. Why Hellion shields mattered. Why Numa debts were sacred. Why the Ashbelt trusted deeds over seals. Why the Varkan paused for remembered mercy. Why Ralthus engineers needed autonomy more than speeches. Each note was blunt, sometimes tired, never self-pitying, and always signed. In service to the people your crown represents, not to the comfort of the court, Adrian Vale. Then Lord Valor made his final mistake, tried to prove the Empire could survive without truth by murdering everyone truth had saved. On the sixth night, Valor's house fleets seized the central relay towers. They broadcast an accusation across every colony. Princess Seraphine had fallen under human manipulation. Captain Vale had engineered dependency. The outer riots were Terran's psychological warfare, and loyal houses must assume emergency regency to preserve imperial purity. At the same time, Valor's agents triggered sabotage inside Hellion shields. Numagrain elevators, Ralthus seemed stabilizers. And the Fourth Fleet docks. Not enough to destroy everything. Enough to make it look like Adrian's repairs had been traps. Seraphine was in the command pit when the palace lights cut out. Emergency red washed over the mirrors. Ministers screamed. And Captain Sira shoved the princess behind the central rail as gunfire sounded in the upper halls. Valor appeared on the main display from the relay throne. Smiling in white armor, "My beloved princess," he said. "I warned you the human would break the Empire, now, for your own safety. Surrender command before his final treason kills us all." Seraphine looked at the crisis map. Sabotage blooms everywhere Adrian had touched. "Too neat, too theatrical, too cruel," she said. "You planted these failures," Valor sighed. "History will not need that detail. Highness, it will need a victim, a monster, and a savior. I have arranged all three, behind him." Technicians worked at relay consoles, forcing the Empire to watch, forcing every world to doubt the only network keeping them alive. Seraphine's advisors looked at her, terrified, waiting for a plan she did not have. The plan arrived as an old voice on an unauthorized channel. Not loud, not dramatic. "Just tired enough to be human, Valor," Adrian said. "You always did mistake mirrors for windows." Valor's face twitched. The command pit erupted. Admiral Keth shouted. "Captain Vale is on channel." Sira grinned like a blade. Seraphine leaned toward the map. "Adrian, where are you?" His reply came through static. Everywhere he forgot workers existed, the crisis map shifted as hidden diagnostics awakened. Not palace systems, not noble relays, but maintenance beacons, dock worker tags, temple lamps, ashbelt buoys, Hellion shield alarms. Ralthus, engineer networks, Numa grain ledgers. All the small, unglamorous systems Valor had never bothered to corrupt because he did not consider ordinary people strategic. Adrian's voice moved through them all. "Hellion shield crew, Breaker 12, is false flagged. Cut noble override and trust local manual. Numa Elevator 7. Your sabotage charge is in the south counterweight, not the Grain Corps Ralphus engineers. Ignore Palace Command. You have authority to isolate Seam 2. 4th Fleet dock workers. The charges are tied to inspection lanterns. Throw the blue ones into the harbor, Ash Captains. Relay tower blind spots are yours. Light them, across the Empire. People Valar had never counted, began answering copy. Captain done. Captain. For the Widow's Captain for the Red Bridge. Captain for the Shields, Captain. Seraphine felt tears rise and refused them. Adrian was not commanding fleets. He was commanding trust. And trust had been waiting 5 days with sleeves rolled up. Vaylor ordered the relay technicians to cut the unauthorized signal. They tried. The signal multiplied. Bouncing from food scales, school bells, chapel candles, mining drills, hospital monitors, refugee bracelets, and the old Imperial weather net Adrian had repaired in secret after the ice storms. Valor shouted, "He cannot have access to all of this." Adrian answered, "I do not. They do." Then the relay tower cameras turned, one by one, away from Vaylor and toward the technicians, guards, workers, and prisoners inside the tower, showing the Empire the coercion behind the performance. A relay worker with blood on his lip lifted a wrench, looked directly into the camera, and said, "Princess, we were ordered at gunpoint." Not by Captain Vale. Vaylor shot him in the shoulder live. And in that instant his story died. The outer world saw the Savior reveal himself as executioner. The House fleets hesitated. The 4th Fleet, finally powered and furious, requested permission to launch. Seraphine gave it, not with a trembling voice, not with borrowed authority, but with the clarity Adrian had forced her to earn. Admiral Keth, secure the relay towers. Disable House Vaylor ships, minimum casualties. All crews offered surrender. Captain Sira, retake the palace. Arrest conspirators alive. Workers of the Empire, she said, and her voice carried through the unauthorized network. I broke faith with those who kept faith with us. I will answer for that. But tonight, help me keep your homes alive. The answer came not as applause, but as action. Doors opened. Sabotage codes were reported. Hidden loyalists moved. House soldiers found elevators refusing them. Corridors, leading them in circles. Dock cranes, pinning their ships. And citizens who had been called wait became the Empire's skeleton. That was when his absence became his army, not because he owned them, but because he had remembered them first. The battle for the relay towers lasted 41 minutes. The House fleets were newer, richer, polished for parade. But the 4th Fleet crews had widows to honor and dock workers guiding them through maintenance shadows. They disabled engines instead of hulls because Seraphine had ordered surrender offered, and because Adrian had taught them that a captured witness was worth more than a glorious corpse. Ashbelt captains slipped through smugglers' routes and wrapped the central tower in signal nets, blocking Valaire's propaganda while keeping civilian channels open on Helion. Shield workers cut noble overrides and discovered enough hidden siphons to fund 3 hospitals on Numa. Farmers formed bucket lines around grain elevators and sang famine songs. Adrian had recorded years earlier to teach timing during emergency loading. On Ralphus, engineers stabilized Seam by ignoring palace procedure and trusting the packet he had sent them. In the palace, Captain Sira fought through Valar loyalists with kitchen staff, lift engineers, archivists, and the temple sweepers who knew which statues were hollow enough to hide rifles. Seraphine moved with her, not as decoration, not as bait, but as sovereign witness. She saw servants she had never named step in front of blaster fire for corridors Adrian had told them mattered. She saw guards shout old Terran emergency phrases in accents that would have made him smile. She saw Lord Vaylor's polished rebellion fail because every small person he dismissed had become a locked door in his path. Vaylor fled to the upper mirror spire, taking the relay throne with him, and Seraphine followed before anyone could stop her. Sarah cursed and came after. Admiral Keth shouted through comms that the spire was unstable. Adrian's voice cut in. "Princess, do not corner him alone," she said. You told me the throne is memory. Captain, I remember. She climbed through smoke, shattered glass and starlight, past portraits of ancestors who suddenly looked less like rulers and more like witnesses. Vaylor waited beneath the cracked dome, one hand on the relay throne, one blade at the throat of Seraphine's younger cousin Tolan, a boy too harmless to be useful except as leverage. Vaylor's face was wild now. All court polish burned away. Stop there, princess. I can still end this cleanly. Seraphine raised her empty hands. There is no clean version of treason, he snarled. Treason, I saved us from a human web. You let a foreigner make beggars more powerful than blood. She stepped closer. No, I let you convince me that gratitude was weakness. That was my shame, not his, Vaylor laughed. And the relay throne began charging behind him. If I cannot rule the Empire, I will break the channels that let him rule it. Adrian's voice whispered through Seraphine's ear bead. He is overloading the tower. If it blows, the central network dies. Outer systems lose coordination. Evacuate now. Seraphine looked at Tolan, at the charging relay, at Vaylor's shaking blade, and understood Adrian was still trying to save her before the structure. That was why she could not obey. She took another step. Vaylor pressed the blade harder. I said stop, Seraphine said. Adrian Vale is not here, Lord Vaylor. You sent him away, remember? I sent him away too. You wanted an empire without him. Here it is. Just you, me, and what we are without the person who kept cleaning up our cowardice. The words hit Vaylor like a slap. His eyes flicked, not to her, to the mirrors, where he could see himself surrounded by fracture lines. She continued, You called him a foreign shadow, but you were the one who could not stand sunlight. You called his promises illegal because yours were empty. You called his mercy manipulation because fear was the only currency you understood. Vaylor screamed and shoved Tolan away, lunging at Seraphine. She was not faster than him, not stronger, not trained for duels and broken spires, but Syrah had reached the stair, and Talon, falling, grabbed Vaylor's ankle, and Seraphine did the simple thing Adrian had taught through every crisis. She noticed what proud people ignored. The relay throne's grounding chain lay across the floor. Cut loose by overload, she kicked it into Vaylor's path. He tripped, blade skidding, hand striking the charged relay surface. Light swallowed his scream, not killing him, not quickly, but throwing him backward hard enough to break armor and pride together. Sarah pinned him before he could move. Seraphine slammed both palms onto the emergency release. The relay charge vented upward through the broken dome. A blue pillar visible from half the capital, the network survived. Only after Valar was bound did Adrian arrive. Not from a dramatic shuttle or secret tunnel, but limping up the stairs with 2 ash captains and a medical kit. Because, of course, he had come to the most dangerous place once he knew she was there. His coat was torn from the rescue, his face gray with exhaustion. And when he saw Seraphine alive, something in his shoulders loosened before he could hide it. She stood amid glass smoke. And the captured traitor who had taught her the cost of applause. Captain Vale, she said. He stopped at the edge of the dome. No longer her officer, no longer her servant, no longer the shadow she had blamed, Highness, around them. Every channel in the Empire was still open, every world listening. Seraphine could feel history waiting to see whether pride would survive evidence. She removed the sapphire crown from her head, not surrendering it, but lowering it until it rested against her heart. I sent you away in shame, she said, and the shame was mine. I mistook hidden labor for stolen power. I mistook silence for guilt. I mistook noble applause for truth. And because of that, people suffered. You warned me the Empire had 6 days. I used 5 learning that the throne is memory. Adrian said nothing, which was mercy. She continued, I cannot command you to return. I do not deserve that, but I ask you. Before every world I failed to remember, will you help us rebuild, not as my shadow? Not as my father's habit, not as a foreign tool, but as a free ally whose counsel I must earn by listening. Adrian looked at her for a long time. The Empire held its breath again, this time not in fear of enemies, but in fear of an answer it had no right to demand. Adrian finally said, "I will help the people." She nodded. "Accepting the difference, good," he added. "I will advise the crown while the crown remembers that people are not systems to be managed after nobles are comfortable. I will not carry promises in secret anymore. Every debt goes into public law, every shield guarantee, every widow payment, every worker clause, every refugee corridor, every mercy code. No more empire by hidden patches." Seraphine felt the words strike exactly where they needed to. "Agreed," she said, "and when I am wrong." "You will hear it before the court does," Adrian answered. A faint smile touched her mouth despite everything. "Harsh bargain, necessary bargain," he said, and she almost laughed because the word that had once enraged her now sounded like foundation. She turned to the open channel. "Citizens of the Vare Dominion, tonight you saw what held us together. Not blood, not mirrors, not noble permission, but promises kept by hands most of us never noticed. By dawn, I will convene a public ledger. Captain Vale's private obligations will become imperial law or be judged openly. House Valer's conspiracy will face trial under witness from every affected world. Hazard debts will be paid, shield rights restored, refugee corridors protected, and no sovereign after me will be allowed to forget what survival costs." She placed the crown back upon her head, heavier than before, truer than before. "The court will say this confession weakens us. Let them. An empire too fragile for truth deserves to break. We will become stronger than that. The empire did not heal in one night. HFY stories are often told as if one speech can mend 1,000 wounds. But humans know better. They know rebuilding is less glamorous than rescue, and more demanding than battle." Adrian spent the next months doing what he had always done, but in daylight. He sat with Helian shield workers as lawyers turned emergency promises into citizen defense rights. He stood beside Numa farmers while famine debt became grain partnership law. He helped Ralthus engineers form an independent safety council that could overrule palace vanity. He negotiated with Ashbelt captains until smuggling routes became recognized medical corridors. He faced Varkan envoys and reminded them of the Red Bridge with enough respect to make peace. Feel like a debt neither side wanted to dishonor. He trained Seraphine's ministers to ask who is missing from this room before asking, "How do we control them?" He refused medals, refused a palace apartment, refused a statue so firmly that the sculptor cried. Some nobles still called him dangerous. He agreed with them. A person who remembers what power once forgotten is always dangerous. Seraphine changed too. Not suddenly, not perfectly, but visibly. She visited dockyards without warning and listened when workers corrected her. She learned the names of lift engineers, not because names were charming, but because anonymity had been the first hiding place of neglect. She turned court applause into a warning signal whenever nobles praised her icily. She asked what the outer worlds thought and watched their smiles thin. She argued with Adrian often, sometimes fiercely. And each argument repaired a place where obedience had once pretended to be loyalty. Lord Valer's trial lasted 30 days, not because guilt was unclear, but because Seraphine insisted every world harmed by his conspiracy testify. He sat in a restraint chair beneath the same hall of mirrors where Adrian had been exiled, and listened as widows. Engineers, farmers, refugees, dockworkers, guards, temple nurses, Varkan emissaries, and ash captains described the invisible architecture he had tried to burn. Seraphine did not look away. Adrian stood at the rear wall, not beside the throne, by choice, and when Valer accused him again of ruling through dependency, Adrian answered only once, "I did not make them depend on me. I noticed the Empire already depended on them." That sentence ended Valer more completely than a death order could have. He was sentenced to life rebuilding the systems he had sabotaged under public labor witness. A punishment nobles called barbaric until citizens called it justice. The court adapted because courts survive by pretending they intended the outcome. They began praising transparency, worker covenants, mercy, diplomacy, and citizen defense rights as ancient oralist principles. Seraphine let them. Then signed laws making the principles harder to abandon when fashion changed. Her father's portrait was moved from the war room to the public ledger hall, not as demotion, but as a reminder. The old emperor had trusted a human to carry memory because he could not force the court to value it. His daughter would try to do better, years later, when the Vair Dominion became known not as the empire that cracked, but as the empire that remembered. Schoolchildren learned the story in a way softer than it had felt. They learned that Princess Seraphine exiled Captain Adrian Vale, that the outer worlds faltered, that traitors rose, that citizens answered, that the human returned, that promises became law. They drew pictures of the Mirror Spire, the Sable Drift Rescue, the Helian Shields, the Red Bridge, and the quiet captain with old boots who hated statues, but veterans told the story differently in dockyards and border stations. They said the empire broke because it had mistaken one man's labor for one man's ambition. They said Adrian's absence did not create the collapse. It revealed the collapse that pride had hidden. They said humans are terrifying not because they conquer every field, but because they remember the names under the maps, the widows behind the budgets, the roots beneath the speeches, the children beneath the shields. They said a human can hold an empire together without sitting on its throne. Simply by keeping faith in places, emperors forget to look, and if you send such a human away in shame, do not be surprised when all the promises he was carrying fall to the floor. Princess Seraphine never again allowed the Hall of Mirrors to host a judgment without public witness. She kept Adrian's old silver signet in a glass case beside the first page of the public ledger, not as a relic of his service, but as evidence of her failure. On the plaque beneath it, she ordered no poetry, only the words she had learned too late and still in time. The throne is not only a chair, it is also memory. Adrian complained that it was dramatic. Seraphine answered that humans had no moral authority to object to drama after saving people in space ruins and refusing statues. He said that was unfair. She said necessity, and he smiled, just once, eventually. Enemies tested the Dominion again, as enemies always test any realm that chooses reform over fear. They found fleets less glamorous, but better paid. Workers less obedient, but more loyal. Treaties less secret, but harder to break. Citizens less quiet, but faster to mobilize, and a princess who asked first what had been promised. They also found a gray-haired human in a plain coat standing near the map, not as shadow, not as master, but as witness. And wise enemies reconsidered, because Seraphine had learned the empire did not break when she lost a human servant. It broke when she dismissed the person who remembered everyone else. And after he returned freely, openly, unwilling to carry hidden burdens for a proud throne again. The Vair Dominion became something older. Empires feared more than armies, a realm that kept its promises, a crown with a memory and a human beside it, making sure forgetting never looked like strength again.